When I had a stroke at the age of 75, I thought it was the end. My wife was gone. Eleanor had left 5 years earlier, taking all the joy of my house on Maple Street with her. The kids were gone. Werner and his family on the other side of Dayton, Lucille as far away as Colorado. And then one gray morning, half my body just refused to obey. The doctor said I was lucky I had no brain damage, no speech. Only my left arm moved like a stranger's, and my leg braided when I walked. Werner offered to move in with them temporarily until I recovered. That was 3 years ago. What the hell is temporary? Melody, his wife, made it clear she wasn't thrilled at the prospect of living with a disabled father-in-law, but she kept her smile as long as her son was around. "Mr. Farndon, you'll be comfortable in our guest wing," she chirped as she showed me to my room on the first floor. "No stairs, private bath, perfect for your condition." I caught that subtle contempt in her voice when she said the word condition, like I'd turned into some unpleasant substance that had to be tolerated in my perfect home. Melody Farndon, knee bright, is a woman of 38, red-haired with a sharp chin and a smile that never reaches her eyes. A realtor with a license and ambitions the size of Mount Rushmore. Their home in an upscale Dayton neighborhood is her calling card, a sales brochure for her clients. And I, Pierce Farndon, a former water inspector with a creaky gait and a wrinkled face, am clearly ruining the picture. "Good morning, Melody," I say every time I see her in the kitchen stirring her fancy vegan milk into a green smoothie. "Ah, Mr. Farndon," she always replies with a second delay, as if she's just spotted a cockroach on the floor. "How did you sleep?" Always Mr. Farndon, never Pierce, never Dad, even after 3 years of living together. "Fine," I lie, even though we both know she picked the cheapest mattress she could find and the springs dig into my back every night. She nods and goes back to her phone, looking through messages from customers. I cease to exist for her. It happens this way every morning. Werner is usually already gone. He works for a computer security company and is often gone before dawn. My son is a tall, slightly slouching man of 42, with my gray eyes and his mother's personality, soft, accommodating. Sometimes I think Melody chose him for that malleability. "I've increased the temperature in your room, Mr. Farndon," she said one day when Werner was home. "Old people need more warmth." "How thoughtful," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. Werner smiled, pleased with our understanding. He didn't know that a week ago I'd asked Melody to make the room cooler. The heat was giving me a headache. She nodded and forgot. After they leave, I quietly adjust the thermostat settings through my phone. Yes, my phone. Melody thinks I can barely send a text. She doesn't know that I've spent the last 2.5 years researching all the technological advances I could possibly need. When you lose mobility, you begin to appreciate any means of control. The smartphone has become my window to the world and my secret weapon. Through it I read the news, watched documentaries, chat on forums for former utility workers. Sometimes I correspond with Lucille, though our relationship has cooled since a strange misunderstanding 2 years ago when she stopped returning my calls after Thanksgiving. "Are you typing something, Mr. Farndon?" Melody asked one day, making me wince. She crept up as silently as a cat. "Checking the weather forecast," I replied, quickly closing the app where I was reading an article about modern smart home systems. At my age, it's important to know if it's going to rain. Joints, you know. "Sure," she smiled her fake smile. "If you need help with the phone, feel free to reach out. These new technologies are so complicated for your generation." "I'm getting by," I mumbled. "An old dog can learn new tricks, too." She laughed as if I'd said something incredibly funny and walked away, swaying her hips in her tight skirt. One day I overheard her talking to her friend Jennifer on the phone, and you can imagine, he sits there all day, staring out the window and mumbling to himself. Completely useless. Werner says he used to be so active, building things in the garage, gardening. Now all he does is eat, sleep, and complain about his health. I stood outside the door, clutching my cane tightly, muttering to myself. I was doing a crossword puzzle in my mind, complaining about my health. I hadn't mentioned my ailments once in the last month. She didn't even bother to recognize me, just put me in the burdensome old man category. It's funny how quickly a person can become invisible in their own family. I've lived almost 8 decades, built a house with my own hands, raised 2 kids, made sure the water in town was clean for 35 years. And now I'm just an inconvenient piece of furniture that can't be thrown away. Melody masterfully demonstrates her caring in front of Werner, puts an extra pillow under me, asks if I'm cold, offers me refills at dinner. As soon as he leaves the room, her face stiffens. Her eyes glaze over. She turns into a mannequin with memorized phrases. "Mr. Farndon, would you mind not leaving your pills on the kitchen table? We're having company tonight, and it looks, unappetizing. Mr. Farndon, have you mixed up the remote controls again? Now the TV in the living room doesn't work. Mr. Farndon, why didn't you tell me you were out of milk? I could have bought some, but now I have to go to the store before work." Little jabs, daily reminders that I'm a burden. I've learned to return the favor. "I apologize, Melody. My old eyes didn't notice the milk was out. Probably just like your young ones didn't notice my grocery delivery requests. I left the list on the refrigerator 3 days ago." She presses her lips together, and I can see the anger flashing in her eyes, but she never allows herself an open confrontation. It would be too inelegant for a lady like Melody Farndon. Instead, she retaliates in her own way. Forgets to return my phone calls, rearranges my things so I have trouble finding them, plans family events without considering my capabilities, like a second-floor restaurant without an elevator that I can't get up to with my cane. She especially likes to invite guests without telling me. I come out of my room in my bathrobe and slippers, and some strangers are sitting in the living room with glasses of wine. Melody immediately flies over to me. "Mr. Farndon, I knocked on your door, but I guess you didn't hear me. We have important guests from the agency today." That's a lie. She never knocked. Werner, on the other hand, really doesn't notice anything. He comes home late, tired, eyes red from the computer. He hugs me, asks me how my day went, but I can see his thoughts are far away. He listens to my answers half-heartedly, nodding absent-mindedly. I've stopped telling him about his wife's shenanigans. Once I tried, he just frowned and said, "Dad, Melody's working very hard to make you comfortable. You could be more grateful." That's when I realized I'd lost this battle before it even started. The son will always side with the wife. That's the way the world works. I have found my little joys. Every morning, when the weather permits, I go out into the garden and sit on the bench under the old oak tree. Melody hates that bench, says it spoils the landscaping. But Werner insisted that I have a place to relax in the fresh air. I sit there, watch birds and neighbors, take notes on my phone. Yes, I keep a diary of observations. An old inspector's habit is to write down anything that seems important. I used to record the pH levels in the city's reservoirs. Now I record Melody's leaving and arriving times, the names of her frequent guests, scraps of phone calls. It's not that I'm going to use this information, just a habit. Sometimes, when no one's home, I connect to the smart home system through an app I secretly installed. Werner set up all this tech, cameras, thermostats, locks, lights, and gave me basic senior citizen access. I've found that with a little help from YouTube tutorials, I can gain a lot more control than my son envisioned. I can see when Melody comes home in the middle of the day, even though she's supposed to be at work. I hear her talking to someone on the phone, calling Werner a nerd and a workaholic. I notice her trying on expensive new dresses in front of the mirror in the hallway, even though she complains to her son about the lack of money. But I keep these observations to myself. I'm waiting. For what exactly? I don't know. Maybe the right moment to open my son's eyes. Maybe a chance to leave here with dignity, rather than being tossed into the nursing home that Melody discreetly leaves brochures about on the coffee table. "Look at the beautiful garden there, Mr. Farndon," she says, pointing to a glossy photograph of old people in wheelchairs. "And round-the-clock medical care. Isn't it wonderful?" "I'd rather die in my own bed," I reply, looking her straight in the eye. "No one's talking about dying," she laughs, but her eyes remain cold. "It would just be more comfortable for everyone, especially for you." For everyone means for me, and we both know it. My phone has become not just a window to the world, but a shield. While I have that connection, I'm not completely at her mercy. I can order food when she forgets to put me on the shopping list. I can call a cab if I need to go to the doctor and she's too busy to take me. I can contact the outside world if something happens. Sometimes I look at pictures of our old house on Maple Street. Werner sold it after my stroke to pay the medical bills. I don't blame him. It was a practical decision. But a part of me died with the loss of that house, where every crack in the wall, every creaky floorboard had a story. Now I live in Melody's perfect, sterile house, where everything is picked out from interior design catalogs, but there isn't an ounce of soul. My room is the only place I can be myself, though Melody invades it under the pretense of cleaning, rearranging my things as she sees fit. "It's much more comfortable this way, Mr. Farndon," she says, moving my books to the top shelf, where I can't reach without a stepladder. "And it looks neater. The small battles, the daily humiliations, the slow erasure of my identity, my independence, my dignity. But I'm hanging in there. 78 years of life have taught me one thing: patience. I can wait. And who knows, maybe one day patience will reward me with the opportunity to show Melody that this old man isn't completely useless yet." I woke up early as usual. 78 years old today is a number that makes me dizzy. Eleanor hadn't even lived to 70. I ran my hand over my wrinkled cheek as if checking to see if I was still here, in this shabby room, in someone else's house, with someone else's life around me. Outside the window, Dayton was waking up. The sun had colored the tops of the trees gold, and somewhere in the distance could be heard the murmur of a mower. Mr. Taylor across the street always started cutting the lawn at first light, like he was afraid the grass would run away. I would laugh at the thought if today were a normal morning, but today is April 16th, my birthday, a day that had always been celebrated modestly but with dignity. Eleanor baked my favorite pecan pie. The children gave me handmade cards. Later, when they grew up, these cards were replaced by ties and books, which I never wore or read, but I appreciated the very fact of attention. I rose slowly from the bed, pulled on my robe, and fumbled for my slippers with my feet. My cane stood by the bedside table, a faithful companion after a stroke. The phone was habitually on the charger. I checked the time, 6:30. The house was still asleep. I could enjoy the silence before Melody filled the space with her presence. In the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of coffee, the one treat I allowed myself every morning despite the doctor's objections. To hell with their inhibitions. At 78, a man deserves at least a decent cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at my hands, the knotted fingers, the protruding veins, the brown spots of age. Those hands had built dams, fixed pipes, held babies, stroked Eleanor's hair. Now they could hardly hold a cup without shaking. "Oh, you're up already," Melody's voice broke into my musings. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her ivory silk robe, her red hair perfectly styled. Even at 6 in the morning, she looked like she was ready for a magazine photo shoot. "Good morning, Melody," I said. "You're early today." She walked to the coffee machine without looking at me. "Did you sleep badly?" "It was fine," I paused. "Today's a special day." She frowned, going over possible events in her mind. "April 16th, she mumbled. "Ah, your birthday. Right. No enthusiasm, no warm wishes. Just a statement of fact, as if I'd reminded her of a dental appointment." "78," I said, though no one asked me. "Congratulations," she faked a smile. "You look vivacious for your age." A fake compliment followed immediately by the way, I wanted to warn you, we're having some important guests tonight. Clients who are interested in the Riverside Mansion. Very wealthy people. I've been preparing this meeting for weeks." I slowly set the cup down on the table. "Tonight?" "Yes, 7 o'clock tonight. The caterer will arrive at 5 to set up," she said in a businesslike tone, looking at her phone. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable spending the evening in your room. I can bring you dinner there." "It's my birthday today, Melody," I said quietly. She looked away from the phone for a second. "I know. I'm sorry it's such a coincidence, but this meeting can't be rescheduled. Why don't we celebrate this weekend? I'm sure Werner won't mind." "I was planning on inviting a few friends," I lied. "I don't have any friends left in Dayton. Everyone's either dead, moved closer to their kids, or in nursing homes, but I wanted to see her reaction." Melody froze. "Friends? You never mentioned birthday plans. I've already organized. Invitations sent out, catering booked, even the florist is coming in the morning. We can't cancel." "I've lived in this house for 3 years," I said, feeling anger rising in me. Was it really that hard to ask me about my plans for my own birthday? She pressed her lips together. "Mr. Farndon, I'm very sorry for the coincidence, but business is business. These clients can bring in commissions that will cover your keep for a whole year. There it is. Your allowance, like I was some stray animal they were sheltering out of mercy. I get a pension," I reminded her, "and Social Security benefits. I put that money into the general budget." "Of course," she smiled her fake smile. "And we appreciate it. But let's be realistic. Your contribution barely covers the cost of your medications." I was about to reply something harsh, but at that moment my phone rang. Werner. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded cheerful. "Happy birthday. 78. Wow. How are you feeling?" "Fine," I said, glancing at Melody, who had defiantly left the kitchen. "Thanks, son. I'm sorry I can't be with you this morning. I'm swamped at work and there's a security emergency with a client. But we'll definitely celebrate this weekend, okay? I ordered you a gift. Should be here today." "Thank you," I said again. "Did you know you're having guests over tonight?" "Yeah," Melody told me. "Some important clients. I'm sorry it's such a coincidence. She worked really hard to get that contract." "Of course," I sighed. "Work comes first. You realize how important this is to her. For us." He sounded a little worried. "We're living in a difficult time. Prices are rising. Mortgages are—" "I understand," I interrupted him. I didn't want to listen to another lecture about the family budget. "Good luck at work." "Thanks, Dad. I'll see you tonight. And happy birthday again." He disconnected, and I was left sitting there with my phone in my hand. Even on my birthday, the conversation turned to Melody's work. She always came first, her career, her ambitions, her plans. I slowly got up and went to my room. I needed to get dressed and somehow face the day with dignity. As I passed the living room, I heard Melody's voice. She was on the phone, apparently with her eternal friend Jennifer. "And he has the nerve to resent me. It's like I made an appointment to meet him on his birthday. Like I have to remember those dates and organize my work around his schedule." I stopped around the corner, listening. "No, you have no idea how exhausting it is," Melody continued. "That old man is ruining our whole life. Werner's too soft to send him to a nursing home, and I have to put up with his constant grousing, his smell of old age in the house, his constant presence. I can't invite my girlfriends over for a glass of wine without him crawling out of his room with questions and complaints." I clenched my cane so hard my knuckles turned white. "You know, sometimes I think, no, it's awful," she lowered her voice. "Sometimes I think how much easier it would have been if that stroke had been more serious." I felt the blood rush from my face. My sister-in-law had just wished me dead, or at least a more severe disability. "Okay, I've got to run. The florist will be here any minute. Yes, of course you're invited. 7 o'clock. There'll be champagne and oysters. Very high end. These clients are worth it. She ended the conversation, and I slipped into my room as quickly as my limp would allow. My heart was pounding like crazy. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw my face pale with red blotches on my cheeks. So this is what she really thinks. That's what's behind her fake smiles and feigned concern. She wishes I wasn't alive. I sat down on the bed, trying to calm my breathing. Something had to be done. This couldn't go on like this. Maybe I should have called Lucille. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, but maybe now would be a good time to reconnect. I pulled out my phone, found her number, but my finger hovered over the call button. What do I say? Hey, daughter, your sister-in-law just wished me dead. Take me away from here. It sounded pathetic even in my head. I spent the entire day in my room, only going out to the bathroom and the kitchen for tea. Melody was busy getting ready for the evening. I could hear her commanding the florists, the waiters, the cleaners. The house was filled with the smells of food, flowers, and furniture polish. At 5 o'clock in the evening, when the hustle and bustle had reached its climax, I decided to go out. I showered, put on my best suit, dark blue, slightly worn at the elbows, but still presentable. After all, it was my birthday and I had a right to look dignified. When I walked out into the living room, Melody was just instructing a young waiter on how to arrange the glasses. When she saw me, she froze for a moment. "Mr. Farndon," she began with a strained smile, Are you going somewhere?" "No," I answered calmly. "I live here, remember?" "Of course, but—" She glanced nervously at the catering staff. "I thought we agreed that you would spend the evening in your room. The guests would arrive in 2 hours." "I don't remember such an agreement." I made my way to the couch and sat down, watching her face begin to redden with anger. "This is my house as much as it is yours." "Technically, it's Werner's house," she hissed, stepping closer. "And there's a very important business meeting here today. Please don't make this any harder than it has to be." "I'm not going to interfere with your business plans," I said, "but I have a right to celebrate my birthday. I've invited a couple of friends. They'll be here at 6. It was a pure lie. I didn't have any friends who could come, but I wanted to see her reaction, and she didn't disappoint." "What?" Her voice trailed off into a squeal, and several employees turned around. She noticed this and switched to a furious whisper. "You can't just invite some people into my house unannounced. There are going to be some very important clients here. $1 million deal is at stake." "Then maybe you should have considered my plans in advance?" I asked, surprised at my own audacity. "Or at least asked me before occupying the whole house on my birthday." Her face contorted with rage, but she quickly pulled herself together, glancing back at the workers. "We'll talk about this elsewhere." She turned abruptly and walked towards the kitchen. I rose slowly and followed her, leaning on my cane. In the kitchen, Melody turned to me, crossing her arms over her chest. "Listen, Mr. Farndon, I understand you're upset about your birthday, but we can celebrate tomorrow or this weekend. Tonight is critical to my career. I can't have any of your retired friends spoiling it with their talk of ailments and memories of the 50s. "My friends don't exist," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I lied to see your reaction, and I did." She blinked, clearly not expecting it. "Then why all the drama? To get on my nerves?" "To remind me that I'm a human being too, Melody. A man who deserves to be honored on his birthday." She sighed, suddenly almost sincere. "Look, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that today is a really important day for me. My reputation at the agency depends on these clients. Maybe we can find a compromise. You could stay at the party for a while and then go back to your place?" I considered her offer. It was a step forward, albeit a forced one. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll behave myself. I won't talk about my ailments and my 50s. She smiled slightly, perhaps sincerely for the first time all day. "Thank you. I appreciate that. Happy birthday, Mr. Farndon." We were standing in awkward silence when suddenly the doorbell rang. "It must be the decorator with the balloons." Melody hurried to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, feeling strangely satisfied with our conversation. Maybe for the first time in 3 years we actually talked like human beings. But my joy was short-lived. Melody returned a couple minutes later, holding a box. "This is for you," she said, holding out the package. "From Werner, I believe." I took the box. It was heavier than I'd expected. Something electronic, apparently. "By the way," Melody said casually, "I forgot to show you something in the basement. Remember when you said you wanted to find your old photo albums? I think I saw them down there in one of the boxes." "In the basement?" I frowned. "But my albums are in the closet in my room." No, I mean those old ones with the black and white photos. You mentioned them a couple months ago. They're in the boxes we moved from your old house." I vaguely recalled the conversation about the photos, but I was sure all my albums had long since been disassembled and stored in my room. "Come on, I'll show you." Melody was already heading for the door that led to the basement. "It'll only take a minute." Something in her voice sounded strange to me, but curiosity overcame it. I really treasured the old photos. There were pictures of my parents, of a young Eleanor, of the kids as babies. We went down the stairs to the basement. It was cool and dry, a modern room with concrete walls, good lighting and shelving along the walls. No damp or spiders like in the basements of old houses. "Where are they?" Melody started looking at the boxes on the far shelving unit. "I think it's around here somewhere." I stood at the foot of the stairs, leaning on my cane and holding a box with a gift from my son in the other hand. Suddenly, Melody shrieked and dashed for the exit. "What's wrong?" I asked, but she had already run past me and up the stairs. I turned around and saw the basement door slam shut, and then I heard the sound of a key turning. "Melody?" I waddled toward the stairs. "What's going on?" "Stay put," came from behind the door. "The door's jammed. I'll call a repairman after the party." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Melody, open up right now." "I'm sorry, Mr. Farndon, but I can't risk my career on your whims. I promise I'll let you out as soon as the guests leave. There's a sofa and a toilet so you'll be perfectly comfortable." "You can't lock me in here." I banged on the door with my cane. "It's illegal." "Think of it as a birthday present, a few hours of peace and quiet." Her voice sounded distant. "Don't worry. Werner will be late at work and I'll tell him you've decided to rest in your room. I'll see you at midnight." I heard her receding footsteps and then there was silence. I was locked in the basement, on my 78th birthday. I stood leaning on my cane and stared at the closed door. I couldn't believe it had really happened. That I, a former water inspector, a man with 40 years of public service, a father of 2, had been locked in the basement like a naughty child. First came the anger, fierce, all-consuming anger. I hit the door with my cane. "Melody, open the damn door right now," I shouted, realizing she was already gone. I pounded on the door again and again until my knuckles were bloody. Then I tried to kick the lock with my cane, but only bent it. Damn it. Without the cane, I'd have an even harder time getting around. I sank heavily onto the step, trying to stop the trembling in my hands. I needed to calm down and think. This whole situation was so absurd that it bordered on criminal. Holding a man against his will, isn't that illegal? My thoughts were racing frantically. Should I yell? Knock on the walls? But who would hear? The basement was well insulated, the walls concrete. Gradually, the rage gave way to a cold realization. Melody did this on purpose. Meticulous planning. Lured me in here knowing I couldn't get out on my own, and she wasn't going to let me out until the party was over. I took a deep breath, trying to deal with the humiliation. 78 years, and I was locked up like a naughty puppy. Deep inside, fear stirred. What if she didn't come at all? What if she decided to leave me here overnight? Or longer? No, those thoughts weren't leading anywhere. Melody's a bitch, but not stupid enough to commit a real crime. She just wanted to get me out of the way for the duration of an important meeting. I slowly made my way down to the end of the stairs and looked around. The basement was set up like a small workshop and storage room at the same time. A workbench along one wall, racks of tools and boxes along the other. There was an old couch in the corner, apparently the comfort Melody had mentioned. Next to it was a door to a small bathroom, a former utility room that Werner had remodeled last summer. I put the box with my son's gift on the workbench and sat on the couch, trying to collect my thoughts. There were muffled sounds coming from upstairs. Apparently guests were starting to arrive. Music, laughter, glasses clinking. My birthday party was going on without me. I reached for my pocket, my phone still in my pocket. Of course, Melody hadn't thought about the fact that I could call for help. In her mind, I was a helpless old man who could barely dial a number. My first impulse was to call Werner. But then came doubt. What would I say? Your wife locked me in the basement? Would he believe me? Or would he take her side again, thinking I was exaggerating? Dad, you must have misunderstood. Melody was just concerned for your safety. I could literally hear his voice in my head. Plus, he said he was busy with an important project. And knowing my son, that meant his phone was lying somewhere off to the side while he was immersed in his work. One could have called emergency services. But the thought of the fire department breaking down the basement door and then finding out it was a family dispute. No, I didn't want that kind of humiliation. And I didn't want trouble for Werner, no matter what. He is my son, after all. I looked at the phone. What else could I do? And then it hit me. A home security app. Werner had installed a smart home system about a year ago. Cameras, motion sensors, remote control of locks and lights. He'd given me basic access, figuring that at my age, complicated technology would only confuse me. But he didn't realize how much time I'd spent learning the system. I opened the app and logged in with my account. Basic access allowed me to see camera images in common areas, the hallway, the living room, the backyard. But I discovered long ago that I could gain more control if I exploited certain vulnerabilities in the system. Months of covert experimentation hadn't gone to waste. I activated the camera in the living room. The party was in full swing. 20 elegantly dressed people with glasses of champagne, quiet jazz music, waiters with trays. Melody was the center of attention, in a tight-fitting dark green dress, her hair high, her smile radiant, the perfect hostess of the house. Hypocritical cunt, I muttered, zooming in. She was talking to a tall man in an expensive suit. Judging by her body language, the tilt of her head, the touching of her hair, she was definitely flirting. But that could have just been part of her job as a realtor. Charming clients was her specialty. I switched to the camera in the dining room. That's where the waiters were setting up appetizers. Then to the camera in the hallway. A few more guests had just arrived. Turning back to the living room, I noticed that Melody and the tall man had disappeared. I quickly looked through the other cameras but didn't see them. That was odd. Where could they have gone? I remembered that Werner had installed a camera on the back porch to keep track of packages. Switching to it, I saw Melody and the man. They were standing close together, talking in a low voice. I turned on the sound. "You can't go in here, Melody," the man said. "It's too risky." "Werner's going to be at work late at night," she replied. "And the old man is locked in the basement. No one will know." I tensed up. What are they talking about? "You've got a house full of guests anyway." The man shook his head. "We can't just disappear." "Then let's meet later." She put her hand on his chest. "At our usual place, around 11 o'clock. "What about your husband?" "I told you he's at work." Melody sighed impatiently. "Project of the century or something. He won't even notice I'm gone." "What if he does?" "I'll tell him I was dropping off the last of the guests," she shrugged. "He always believes what I say. Sometimes it's even boring." The man laughed and leaned toward her. They kissed, not fleetingly, but deeply, passionately. God, Stuart, I've missed you so much, Melody whispered. This week without you had been an eternity. I've missed you too, he replied, but we have to be more careful. Werner's starting to suspect something. Werner? She snorted. He's so immersed in his computers that he wouldn't notice cheating even if I brought you into our bedroom. Still, we need to be careful. If he finds out, the deal's off. He won't. Melody fixed her hair. We're almost there. In a month, the house will be sold. We'll get the commission, and then we'll be out of hiding. What about him? Stuart asked. Werner, she shrugged. He'll get over it. Men always get over it. I meant the old man, your father-in-law. Oh, that one, she waved her hand. We'll put him in a nursing home as soon as the deal's done. I've already picked out a place. Inexpensive. Will Werner go for it? You bet he will, Melody grinned. Especially when I show him his father's medical bills. He has no idea how much all those drugs and procedures really cost. I sat there, numb with shock. My daughter-in-law wasn't just cheating on my son. She was planning to dump him after taking a large commission from some deal. And she was going to send me to a cheap nursing home. I automatically hit the record button. The app saved the video and audio to cloud storage. Now I had proof. We should get back, Melody said, glancing at her watch. The clients are waiting. Not until after one more kiss, Stuart pulled her to him. I turned off the camera. I'd had enough. Melody wasn't just an unpleasant woman, she was a snake, and my son was too blind to see it. What do I do with this information? Tell Werner. He might not believe it. Or worse, he might believe it, but decide to forgive her. I knew my son. He was a romantic at heart, always believing in the best in people. Even if I showed him the tape, he might find justification for her actions. I continued to switch between cameras, watching the party. Melody and Stuart had returned to the living room, now keeping their distance from each other, interacting professionally with the guests. No one would have suspected that a moment ago they had been kissing passionately on the back porch. As I continued to watch, I noticed a few more interesting details. Melody had whispered something in the ear of a woman who looked like Jennifer, and she grinned as she looked at Stuart. So her friend knew about the affair. Stuart, meanwhile, was discussing something with an older man, often mentioning property and tax breaks. I found another interesting feature on the app, remote access to Werner's computer. He had set it up to work remotely and never change passwords. I hesitated. It was an invasion of his personal space. But wasn't it more important to find out the truth? I connected to his work computer and started looking through recent files. In the real estate folder, I found documents relating to some mansion on Riverside Drive. Apparently, it was the same deal Melody was talking about. A house worth $4 million, with a commission of about $120,000. No wonder she was so anxious to get this deal done. But there was something else. In the correspondence between Melody and the agency, I found mention of additional services that were to be paid for separately. What could that mean? I wasn't sure, but it sounded suspicious. I went back to watching the party. Time was passing, and I was still sitting in the basement trying to decide what to do next. Should I call the police? But what would I say? My daughter-in-law locked me in the basement and is cheating on my son? They might think it's just a domestic dispute. And then it hit me. Lucille. My daughter could help. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, but not because of some big fight, but because of a misunderstanding. After Thanksgiving, she stopped returning my calls. I thought she took offense to something I said. But what if it was Melody's job? What if she'd somehow turned Lucille against me like she'd tried to turn Werner against me? I found Lucille's number on my phone and, taking a deep breath, pressed call. After a few beeps, I heard her voice. Papa. She sounded surprised, but not hostile. Lucille, my voice trembled. How are you? I'm fine, she was quiet. This is unexpected. You never call on weekdays. Today is a special day, I said. My birthday. Oh my God, she aghast. I'd completely forgotten. I'm sorry, Daddy. Happy birthday. Thank you. I tried to pull myself together. Lucille, I need your help. I'm in, a difficult situation. What's wrong? She sounded worried. Melody locked me in the basement, I said bluntly, so I wouldn't interfere with her important party. There was a long pause. What? Lucille finally said. Are you serious? Absolutely, I sighed. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. She lured me here under the pretense of showing me some old photos, and then she locked the door, said she'd let me out after the guests left. That's, it's just outrageous. Lucille's voice shook with anger. I'm calling Werner right now. No, don't, I said quickly. He's at work, busy with an important project. I'm not sure he'll believe me over her. Then I'm calling the police. And that's not the best option. I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. They might think it's just a family dispute. Lucille, I think you could come over and help me out. Come over? She sounded surprised. To Dayton? Right now? Yeah, if you can. I knew it was a lot to ask. I realize we haven't talked in a while, and it's a strange request. I thought you didn't want to see me, she interrupted. After Thanksgiving. You stopped returning my texts. I froze. What? You're the one who stopped returning my calls. No, Dad, she sounded confused. I texted you several times, but you didn't answer. And when I called, Melody said you were busy or asleep. It all makes sense now. Melody. Of course it was her. Intercepting my messages, not returning my calls, intentionally destroying my relationship with my daughter. Lucille, I never got your messages, I said quietly. I didn't know about your calls. I think Melody intervened. That? Lucille didn't finish her sentence, but I could hear her breathing heavily. I'll be there in an hour. Hang in there, Dad. Thank you, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. We agreed that she would call me when she got there. I explained to her how to find the key to the basement. It was usually hanging on a hook in the pantry next to the kitchen. I spent the next hour continuing to watch the party through the cameras. Melody shined, going from one guest to the next, smiling and laughing. No one had any idea that the homeowner was sitting locked in the basement and the hostess was planning to elope with her lover. Stuart was also in the center of attention. He was telling something, gesticulating vigorously, and the guests were listening attentively. Apparently, he was an important figure in the deal. When the phone vibrated, I flinched. A message from Lucille. I'm in position, heading to the back entrance like you said. I switched to the backyard camera and saw her, my daughter, whom I hadn't seen in 2 years. She looked beautiful, slender, with a confident gait, wearing an elegant coat. Her brown hair, the same as Eleanor's, was gathered into a simple ponytail. She stepped carefully up onto the porch and slipped through the back door, which I had remotely unlocked through the app. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs and then the sound of a key turning. The door opened and there stood Lucille, my daughter, my savior. Daddy, she rushed over to me, wrapping her arms around me. I missed you so much. Me too, honey. I hugged her back, feeling tears roll down my cheeks. Me too. We stood like that for a few seconds and then she pulled away, looking me over with concern. Are you okay? She didn't hurt you? No, just locked me in. I shook my head. But, Lucille, there's something you need to know. Something Werner needs to know. I showed her the videotape of Melody and Stuart talking on the back porch. Her eyes widened as she watched it and her face paled with anger. That, she gasped with indignation. How could she? Poor Werner. He must find out, I said, but I'm not sure he'll believe me. He will when he sees this. Lucille nodded resolutely at the phone. Come on, Dad. It's time to put an end to all this. We walked up the stairs, Lucille supporting me as my cane was bent from trying to kick the door open. We stopped in the hallway, hearing voices and music from the living room. Ready? Lucille asked, squeezing my hand. More than ready, I replied, clutching the recording phone in my other hand. We walked into the living room and all heads turned toward us. Melody was standing in the center of the room with a glass of champagne, making some sort of toast. When she saw us, she froze, and the glass slipped out of her hand, shattering on the floor. "Mr. Farndon?" she said in a low voice. "Lucille?" Her face paled as she saw the phone in my hand and realized I knew everything. There was absolute silence in the living room. Even the music seemed to have subsided, submitting to everyone's stupor. Melody stood in the center of the room, the glass shards glittering at her feet. Her face took on the hue of a freshly whitewashed wall. "Lucille," she repeated, shifting her gaze from me to her daughter. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "Obviously," Lucille replied coldly. Stuart, the tall man in the expensive suit, took a step forward but stopped when he saw me pick up the phone. His eyes flashed with understanding and something else. Fear? The guests began to whisper, sensing the tension in the air. Melody quickly pulled herself together, putting a professional smile on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the slight misunderstanding. This is my father-in-law, Mr. Pierce Farndon, and his daughter Lucille. They have decided to join us for the evening." She turned to the waiter. "Please remove the shards and bring me a new glass." Then, without losing her smile, she approached us. "What are you doing?" she hissed through her teeth. I explained that today was an important meeting. "Yes, you did," I nodded. "Right before you locked me in the basement." A few of the guests standing nearby had obviously heard what I'd said. Their expressions changed from mild embarrassment to outright curiosity. "Don't be silly," Melody laughed nervously. "You went down there looking for some old photographs. The door must have slammed shut because of the draft." "And locked?" Lucille asked, raising an eyebrow. "The draft? I don't know how it happened." Melody stood her ground. "Maybe the lock malfunctioned. Anyway, it's not a topic of discussion right now. We have company." "It's my birthday," I reminded her, "which you had so studiously ignored." Melody pressed her lips together, her eyes flashing with lightning. "Mr. Farndon, I suggest you go back to your room. We'll discuss this later." "No," Lucille intervened. "No more later. I've already called Werner. He's on his way home." That statement threw Melody off balance. The color drained from her face. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "He's busy with an important project." "I think this is more important," Lucille nodded at my phone. "More important." Melody shifted her gaze to the device in my hand, and I could see the realization slowly dawning on her face. "What is it?" She tried to speak casually, but her voice trembled. "Really," I answered simply. Stuart, who'd been watching our conversation from a distance, suddenly started to leave. He whispered something to the older man beside him, shook his hand, and headed for the exit. But Lucille blocked his path. "Are you leaving already?" she asked with feigned politeness. "What about your meeting with Melody at 11? At your usual place?" Stuart froze like a rabbit in front of a car's headlights. His gaze flickered to Melody, who was looking at us as if we were ghosts who'd shown up at her flawless party. "I don't know what you mean," he mumbled. "I'm sorry. I have an emergency." "At 11? Lucille clarified. "What a strange time for a business meeting." The atmosphere in the room became unbearably tense. The guests began to look at each other, and some of them started to leave, feeling that they had witnessed something very personal. At that moment, the front door swung open, and Werner entered the living room. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his tie was askew, and his eyes were alert. When he saw Lucille and me, he froze for a moment. "Lucille?" He seemed surprised, but not unpleasantly so. "Dad? What's going on?" Melody was the first to rush over to him. "Werner, darling, some ridiculous incident. Your father accidentally locked himself in the basement, and for some reason Lucille thinks I locked him in there. The whole thing is some kind of misunderstanding. Werner frowned, shifting his gaze from his wife to us. "Dad," he turned to me. "Is it true?" I shook my head. "No, son. Melody lured me into the basement and then locked the door with a key. She said, and I quote, 'Sit tight. The door is jammed. I'll call a handyman after the party.'" Werner looked at his wife with bewilderment. "Melody? Is it true?" "Of course not," she exclaimed. "He had misunderstood. I did say the door was jammed, but I didn't lock it. It was an accident." "What about when you said you wouldn't call the handyman until after the party?" I asked. "Yeah," Melody stammered. "I couldn't interrupt an important meeting. You were safe. You were fine." "In confinement," I clarified. "On my birthday." Werner ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. "Look, let's continue this conversation somewhere else," he suggested. "We do have guests." "Yes, we do," Melody said. "Very important clients. Stuart, you're not leaving, are you?" Stuart, almost to the door, reluctantly turned around. "Yeah, I really have to go. It's an emergency call." "Stuart?" Werner frowned. "Do we know each other?" "Stuart Nash," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "We met at a real estate conference last year." "I don't remember," Werner shrugged. "But it doesn't matter. Melody, can we talk in the study? The three of us. Dad, you too, please." "Me too," Lucille said firmly. "I'm coming too." Melody looked like she was cornered. She cast a desperate glance at Stuart, but he studiously avoided looking in her direction. "Darling, what about the guests?" She tried to divert her husband's attention. "They'll have a wonderful time without us for a few minutes," Werner replied. "This is more important." We went into the study, a small room that served as Werner's home office. When the door closed, cutting us off from the noise of the party, there was a heavy silence. "So," Werner sat down at the table, gesturing for us to take seats across from him. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time with accusations or emotions. I just handed him the phone with the video open. "Look at this," I said. "It's from the camera on the back porch. Today's footage." Melody tried to grab the phone, but Lucille stopped her with a firm grip on her wrist. "Don't even think about it," she said quietly. Werner turned on the playback. Melody and Stuart's voices filled the room, discussing their plans for the evening and the future. My son's face grew more somber with each passing second. When the recording ended, he put the phone down on the table and looked at his wife. There was no anger in his gaze, only deep, boundless sadness. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Melody opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. She looked like someone who'd fallen from a great height and realized there was nothing to hold on to. "Werner, I can explain everything," she finally squeezed out. "It's not what you think." "What should I think?" He spread his hands. "You're kissing another man, planning to meet him while I'm at work, saying I won't notice anything because I'm too busy. What exactly did I misunderstand?" It was a moment of weakness," she mumbled. "Stuart doesn't mean anything to me. It's just the business relationship had gone too far. I was going to end it." "Tonight at 11? Werner clarified with a bitter chuckle. "At your usual place?" Melody covered her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "I think that's exactly what you wanted," I interjected. "And it wasn't the only thing you were hiding." I opened the folder on my phone with the notes and screenshots I'd collected over the last few months. "Here are the messages from Lucille that you deleted from my phone." I showed screenshots of the notifications I'd managed to save. "Here are the records of the calls you forgot to give me. And here's a list of my medications with the actual prices, far below the ones you'd shown Werner." Melody turned even paler, if that was even possible. How did you know?" "I wasn't always an old man who mumbles to himself and stares out the window," I answered. "For 35 years I've been monitoring the water quality in this city. Observing and documenting is part of my profession." Werner looked through the materials, and with each new page his face grew more shocked. "Did you do all this?" he asked, looking at his wife. "Intentionally isolated Dad from Lucille, lied about the cost of his medication?" "I was trying to protect our family," Melody suddenly exploded. "You think it's easy living with an old man under the same roof? Keeping track of his medications, listening to his complaints, adjusting your life to his needs. And Lucille just made it harder with her calls and texts. She was always criticizing me, always unhappy with the way I took care of your father." "That's not true," Lucille said quietly. "I just wanted to be part of his life. Part of your life, Werner. But every time I called, she said you were busy or that Daddy was asleep. And when I sent messages, there were no replies." Werner shook his head as if trying to shake off an obsession. "And you were planning to send Dad to a nursing home without discussing it with me?" "It would have been better for everyone," Melody insisted. "He'd get professional care and we could finally live our lives. You said yourself you were tired of being torn between work and taking care of him." "I never said I was tired of taking care of him." Werner clenched his fists. "I said I was tired of working all the time, and I would never, ever agree to send him to some cheap place, as you put it in that post." Melody suddenly changed tactics. Her face contorted with rage. "This is a conspiracy, isn't it? You're all conspiring against me." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "He always hated me, always looking down on me, criticizing me, making remarks. And now he's decided to destroy our family." "You destroyed our family," Werner said quietly. "With your lies, your cheating, your manipulation." "Are you choosing him over me?" Melody almost shouted. "Your grouchy old father instead of your wife?" "I'm choosing the truth," Werner answered. "And from the looks of it, it's not on your side." Melody looked around in despair, as if searching for support or an escape route. When she found neither, she suddenly became despondent. "It's the money," she muttered. "The damn mortgage and your inability to earn enough. If you'd worked harder at your job, I wouldn't have to work my ass off trying to make ends meet." "We've never had money problems," Werner shook his head. "I earn more than enough. It's your ambition and greed, Melody. You've never had enough." There was a heavy silence in the room. I looked at my son, broken, devastated, but somehow stronger than ever before. He had finally seen the truth. "I think you should leave, Melody," Werner finally said. "Tonight." "What?" she glared. "You're kicking me out? Out of my own house?" "It's my house," he replied calmly. "Bought with my money, in my name. You can take your personal belongings. We'll discuss the rest through the lawyers." "You can't do that," she sounded so desperate. "We have guests, important clients." "Your clients," Werner shrugged. "Your career, not my problem. I'm sure you can handle it. You've always been good at your job, better than you did with your family." Melody opened her mouth to object, but then apparently realized she'd lost. Her shoulders slumped and she quietly left the room. After she left, we sat in silence. Werner looked completely devastated. "I'm sorry, Dad," he finally said. "I had no idea. I would never have let her treat you like that." "I know, son." I reached across the table and covered his palm with mine. "It wasn't your fault. She was very skillful at hiding things." "Not just from you," Lucille added, putting her hand on her brother's shoulder. "From all of us." Werner looked up at his sister. "And you? How did you know what was going on?" "Dad called me today," she answered. "Said Melody had locked him in the basement. I came right over." "Why didn't you call me?" Werner asked, looking at me. I sighed. "I knew you were on an important project. I wasn't sure you'd believe me over her." Werner lowered his head. "You're right. I probably wouldn't have believed me. I was so blind." "Don't beat yourself up." Lucille squeezed his shoulder. "Melody is a master manipulator. She fooled all of us." There were muffled voices coming from the living room as the guests began to leave. I heard Melody's sharp voice giving orders. "What now?" Werner asked, looking up at us tiredly. Now, I paused, gathering my thoughts. Now I want to propose something. I'm moving in with Lucille. Me? Lucille looked at me in surprise. If you don't mind, I smiled at her. I don't want to be a burden, but… Daddy, she interrupted me, taking my hand. I've been dreaming about this ever since you had your stroke. I have a big house, lots of room, and it's lonely out there all by myself. But your work, I started. My job is perfectly compatible with taking care of you, she said confidently. I'm a landscaper, remember? Most of the time I work from home, designing gardens for clients, and when I'm out on sites, it's usually for a short time. I felt tears coming to my eyes. My daughter, my little Lucille, now a successful, independent woman, was offering me a home. A real home, not a guest room where I was tolerated out of charity. I'd like that, I admitted. I would like it very much. Werner looked at us with a sad smile. I'll miss you, Dad, but I think it's the right thing to do, especially now, when everything is so complicated. You can always come, Lucille said to her brother. Anytime. My house is your house. Thank you, he nodded. I think I'm going to need some time to make sense of all this. The office door opened and Melody appeared on the doorstep. Her eyes were red but dry, and her face had taken on a hard, determined expression. The guests have gone, she announced. Stuart had left too. I? Werner raised an eyebrow. I'm packing, she lifted her chin, and I'm staying at Yennefer's until I find an apartment. Okay, Werner nodded. Only take personal belongings, Melody. If anything goes missing from the house… I'm not a thief, she snapped at him. Who are you? I asked quietly. The man who locks old people in the basement. The one who lies, cheats, manipulates. Melody looked at me with hatred. You, she hissed. This is all because of you. If it weren't for you, things would be different. Yes, I agreed. It would be. I'd be in a cheap nursing home and you'd be enjoying life with a lover on my son's money. Luckily, that wasn't the case. She clenched her fists but didn't say anything, just turned and walked out, slamming the door. It was just the three of us again, me, my son, and my daughter. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace and confidence. No matter what happened next, we were a family again. Lucille, I turned to my daughter. When can we leave? Whenever you want, Daddy, she smiled. My house is ready for you any time. Tonight, then, I decided. I don't want to stay any longer than necessary. I'll help you pack. Werner got up from the table. Why don't we order a pizza? It's Dad's birthday after all. We should do something to celebrate. I looked at my children with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Pizza sounds great, I said. The best 78-year anniversary present is to be with you again. We left the office and headed to my room to pack up my things. As we passed the stairs to the second floor, I heard Melody throwing something into her suitcase while talking sharply on the phone. Her angry voice echoed through the house, but it had no power over me now. I was free. Lucille held me under her arm, helping me walk without my cane. Werner walked ahead, opening doors. At that minute, despite all the upheaval, I was truly happy. My 78th birthday didn't end the way it began, but perhaps that's the way it was meant to be. You know, Lucille said as we entered my room, I have a beautiful apple tree in my garden. There's a bench under it. I think you'd like to sit there in the morning. With a cup of strong coffee? I said with a smile. The strongest, she laughed. To hell with doctor's orders. I hugged my daughter, feeling the warmth in my chest. 3 months had passed since that memorable birthday. It was a clear July morning and I was sitting as usual on a wooden bench under the apple tree in Lucille's garden. In my hand was a cup of strong coffee, forbidden by all my doctors and warmly approved by my daughter. A sketchbook with sketches and notes lay beside me. The sun was breaking through the foliage, painting whimsical patterns on the ground. Lucille's house in suburban Colorado Springs, a spacious one-story cottage with a large lot, was my new home. No stairs, no thresholds, no obstacles for someone with my limited mobility. Lucille had thought of every detail for my comfort, but without the demeaning connotation that Melody's care gave. "Good morning, Daddy." Lucille came out onto the terrace with a cup of tea in her hands. She was always up early, as was I. Eleanor was a lark, too. Apparently, her daughter had inherited that trait from her mother. "Morning," I replied, smiling. "It's going to be a hot day today." "Yes, it's supposed to be 30 degrees." She sat down next to me. "What are you working on?" I showed her a notebook with drawings of an irrigation system for Lucille's new project, a Japanese-style garden for some technology magnate. "I think you can save on pipes if you run them like this." I pointed to the diagram. "It would distribute the water more evenly." Lucille studied my calculations, nodding respectfully. "That's brilliant, Daddy. You'll save me not only money, but also headaches. It's a difficult site with elevation changes." 35 years in the water supply business means something. I shrugged, but her praise made me feel warm inside. This was what my new life looked like: morning coffee, working on Lucille's projects, walking around the garden. No slanted glances, no Mr. Farndon through my teeth, no feeling that I was a burden. I felt needed, respected, loved. Of course, not everything was perfect. The stroke had left its traces. My left arm still didn't obey well, and sometimes fatigue would set in, making my eyes dark. But Lucille never showed annoyance when I needed help. She was just there for me, no fuss, no ostentatious sympathy. "I need to go to the site today," Lucille said, sipping her tea. "Would you like to come with me? There's a gorgeous view of the mountains." "I'd love to," I nodded. "It's been a long time since I've been out of the house." "Great," she smiled. "We leave in an hour. And yes, Werner called last night when you were asleep. He wants to come over this weekend." I remained silent, and Lucille, noticing my reaction, gently touched my arm. "Are you still not ready to talk to him?" "It's not that I'm not ready," I sighed. "It's just difficult. Werner and I have a strange relationship. After his divorce from Melody, which had gone through surprisingly quickly, apparently she didn't want the details of her affair to come out, he'd tried to connect with me. He called every week, sent gifts, flew to Colorado twice. But something kept me from fully accepting his attempts at reconciliation. Maybe bitterness from 3 years of neglect, maybe frustration at his blindness. "He's trying, Dad," Lucille said softly. "And he's Melody's victim, too." "I know," I shook my head, "and I don't blame him. It's just, I need time." Lucille nodded understandingly. She never pushed, never insisted. That was another reason why I was so comfortable in her house. "By the way," she changed the subject, "do you remember Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor? She asked if you could take a look at her sprinkler system. She said something's wrong." "Sure, I'll take a look at it," I smiled. "Don't tell me you're advertising me to the neighbors as a free plumber." "Absolutely not," Lucille laughed. "As a highly qualified water system consultant, and not free at all," she promised blueberry pie. "That's different," I winked at her. "For a blueberry pie, I'll even clean the pipes." We laughed, and I thought how long it had been since I'd felt so light. At Werner and Melody's house, I was always on guard, ready for another barb or humiliation. Here I could just be myself with all my quirks, grumpiness, and senile quirks. After breakfast, Lucille and I drove to the site, a large plot on the outskirts of town where she was designing a garden for a new client. I sat in the car, looking at the scenery whizzing by, thinking about how my life had changed in those 3 months. Moving in with Lucille had turned out to be the best decision. It was like I had a second wind here in Colorado. My daughter has not just provided me with a roof over my head. She has integrated me into her life. My knowledge and experience has been useful in her business. I've helped design irrigation systems, consulted on drainage issues, even started learning about different plants to better understand her work. And Lucille, in turn, treated me not as a burden, but as a valued employee and, above all, a beloved father. She introduced me to customers as her technical advisor and proudly talked about my experience in the municipal water supply. And I saw how respectfully they talked to me, asked questions, listened to my advice. At the site, Lucille introduced me to a client, a young entrepreneur named Nolan Whittle, who wanted to turn his new home into an oasis of tranquility, as he put it. "Mr. Farndon, Lucille told me about your experience." Nolan shook my hand. "I would appreciate your opinion on the possibility of installing a small koi carp pond at the east end of the garden. I assessed the site, taking into account the slope of the terrain and the composition of the soil, and suggested several solutions." Nolan listened attentively, asked questions, and I felt like an expert whose opinion was valued. After my stroke, I thought this part of my life, professional fulfillment, was over forever. How wrong I was. In the evening back home, Lucille and I were sitting on the terrace discussing the details of the project. The phone rang. "Werner." "Will you take it?" Lucille asked, handing me the receiver. I hesitated for a second, but then nodded and took the phone. "Hello, son," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Dad!" I could hear the genuine joy in Werner's voice. "How are you? How's your health?" "I'm fine," I answered. "I was with Lucille at the site today, consulting on the carp pond." "That's wonderful," said Werner. "I'm so glad that you and Lucille—" He hesitated, and I felt a familiar prick of guilt. My son was suffering. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son. "Lucille said you wanted to come up this weekend." I changed the subject. "Yes, if you don't mind." He sounded hopeful. "I had a week off, and I thought—" "Come on over," I said, taking a step toward him. "We'd be glad to see you." There was a pause, and I could almost see Werner smiling on the other end of the line. "Thank you, Dad," he said at last. I really want to see you." After the conversation, I handed the phone to Lucille, and she chatted with my brother for another 15 minutes, discussing the details of his arrival. I watched the sunset over the mountains and thought about the fact that maybe it was time to stop keeping Werner at a distance. The next day, when I was working in the garden helping Lucille with the transplanting of some exotic shrubs, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard anything about Melody?" I shook my head. "No. Have you?" "Werner mentioned it yesterday." Lucille was carefully tamping the soil around a bush. "She tried to contact him several times." "Why?" I frowned. "Said she wanted to talk things over, start over," Lucille snorted. "Apparently things hadn't been going well with that Stewart guy." I chuckled, imagining Melody trying to get back with Werner after everything that had happened. "What about Werner?" "He said he wasn't interested," Lucille smiled. "I guess our boy had finally grown up." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Melody wasn't the nicest person, but there was something about the thought of her desperate attempts to regain what she'd lost that made me feel sorry for her. "You know," Lucille said, as if she'd read my mind, "sometimes I think she's just an unhappy person who makes everyone around her miserable." "Maybe," I agreed, "but that doesn't justify what she does." "Of course not." Lucille shook her hands off the ground. "It's just, I'm glad we're out of that cycle of unhappiness, all of us." Over the weekend, Werner arrived. He looked rested, tanned, said he'd started spending more time outdoors, working fewer nights. The divorce from Melody, for all its painfulness, had done him good. Our meeting was a little awkward at first. I was still wary, not knowing how to act. But Werner seemed to understand my feelings. He didn't push, didn't demand intimacy, which we hadn't had in years. He was just there, helping Lucille in the garden, discussing with me new technologies that could make my life with limited mobility easier. In the evening, when Lucille had gone to bed, we stayed with Werner on the terrace. He was looking up at the stars, sipping beer from a bottle. "Dad," he he said suddenly, without looking at me. "I want to apologize for all these years, for not seeing the way Melody treated you, for not protecting you." "You didn't know," I shrugged. "I should have known," he shook his head. "You're my father. I should have seen what was going on under my nose." I was silent, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to say that it was okay, that I didn't hold a grudge against him, but that would be a lie. I did feel resentment, even though I realized that Werner was also a victim of Melody's manipulations. "You know," I finally said, "when your mother died, I thought I'd never be happy again. Then I had a stroke and I thought life was over. But here I am, with you two, and—" I hesitated, trying to find the words. "And I'm happy, Werner. In spite of everything, I'm happy." He looked at me, and in the moonlight I could see that his eyes were glistening with tears. "I was so afraid of losing you, Papa," he whispered. "After that birthday, I thought you'd never forgive me." "I haven't," I answered honestly. "Not yet. But I'm working on it. And I love you, son. That's never changed." He nodded, and we sat in a silence that was no longer heavy or awkward. Just two men, father and son, trying to find their way back to each other through pain and misunderstandings. The next morning, as Werner was getting ready to leave, he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, weighing it in my hand. "The deed to the house on Maple Street," Werner replied. "I bought it back. It's yours, Dad, if you ever want to come back to Dayton." I was stunned. The house on Maple Street was where Eleanor and I had lived all our lives, where our children had grown up. I thought I'd lost it forever. "Werner, I can't—" "You can," he interrupted me gently. "It's the least I can do. And Dad, I don't expect you to come back. I know you're fine here with Lucille, but I want you to have a choice. I want you to know that you have a home, always." I hugged my son, feeling something solid inside me begin to melt. Perhaps forgiveness will come sooner than I thought. After Werner left, Lucille and I went back to our normal routine. I continued to help her with projects, advising neighbors on irrigation and drainage, gradually making new acquaintances and connections. One evening, as we sat in the garden discussing a new project, Lucille suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Melody hadn't locked you in the basement that day?" I thought about it, looking at my hands, still strong despite age and illness. I finally answered. "I guess I would have lived there, growing lonelier and lonelier. And then I'd really end up in some cheap nursing home like she'd planned." "So she'd unwittingly done you a favor?" Lucille smiled. "She did," I laughed. "I never thought I'd say this, but thank you, Melody, for locking me in the basement." We both laughed, and I thought about the strange irony of life. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes you have to endure humiliation to find dignity. Sometimes you have to lose a home to find a real one. I looked at my daughter, at the apple tree we sat under, at the mountains in the distance. At 78, after a stroke, after all the losses and disappointments, I had finally found my place. Not just a roof over my head, not just a guest room, but a real home where I was valued, respected, and loved. And even though my arm was still bad and my gait was still unsure, I felt stronger than ever. I had stood my ground. I hadn't given up. I found a way to be not a burden, but a helper, not an extra person, but a needed one. "What are you thinking about?" Lucille asked, noticing my silence. "About the fact that life does not end neither at 70 nor at 78, I answered. "It just changes, and sometimes for the better." Lucille smiled and squeezed my hand. "For the better, Daddy. Definitely for the better.